You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one. I caught my wife cheating, but not with a dude, but with a woman. I did it with him. I always thought of myself as a lucky man. For 5 years, my wife, Mia, had been my everything. My partner, my best friend, the person I trusted with my entire soul. We weren't perfect, but who is? Our love had weathered storms that would have capsized weaker couples. Or so I thought. It was a Thursday night, and like most, it started innocently enough. I came home late from work, exhausted and looking forward to my usual routine of dinner and mindless TV. Mia greeted me at the door, her smile bright but her eyes distant. She had a way of putting up walls I never noticed until it was too late. She was stunning that night, dressed in casual jeans and a fitted sweater that hugged her petite frame. Her long auburn hair was damp from the shower, and her perfume, a soft floral scent, clung to the air between us. As I kissed her cheek, she flinched slightly, barely noticeable, but enough to lodge a splinter of doubt in my mind. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just tired," she said, brushing me off with a quick smile. I should have known something was wrong. Over dinner, we talked about the usual stuff: work, errands, weekend plans. Mia seemed distracted, scrolling through her phone more than usual. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe something at work was bothering her, or she was just having an off day. I didn't press. I've always been the type to give her space when she needed it. It wasn't until later that night, when I went to grab a bottle of water from the fridge, that I saw it. Her phone, sitting on the counter, screen lit up with a notification. A text from someone named Ellie. The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about tonight. I wish you were here." My heart stopped. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Ellie? I racked my brain, trying to recall if Mia had ever mentioned anyone by that name. Nothing. It was a stranger's name, yet it felt like an intruder in my home. I didn't touch her phone. I couldn't. The trust one had for Mia ran too deep, even in that moment of doubt. Instead, I stood there, staring at the screen until it dimmed and went dark, taking the damning message with it. Mia came into the kitchen moments later, her smile faltering when she saw me. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight, guarded. I shook my head. Nothing. Just thinking. She studied me for a moment, then stepped closer, wrapping her arms around my waist. Her warmth, her touch. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like a trap. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the sound of Mia's steady breathing. My mind raced, replaying every interaction we'd had in the past few months. The late nights out with friends, the sudden interest in fitness, the way she'd been more distant lately. All the little things I'd dismissed as harmless suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. I had to know the truth. But how? The next day, while Mia was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I unlocked her phone. My hands trembled as I swiped through her messages, looking for Ellie. When I found the thread, my worst fears were confirmed. The texts between Mia and Ellie weren't just flirtatious, they were intimate. They spoke of secret meetings, stolen kisses, and moments that left my blood boiling. And yet, the name Ellie wasn't what shocked me most. It was the context. Ellie wasn't just some woman from work or a random friend Mia had reconnected with. She was someone Mia was in love with. For hours, I sat in stunned silence, replaying everything I'd read on Mia's phone. The texts with Ellie painted a picture of a relationship that had been going on for months, right under my nose. I didn't know whether to feel rage or heartbreak. Both emotions churned inside me, fighting for dominance. Mia came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, oblivious to the storm raging in my chest. She smiled at me as she walked past, heading to the bedroom to get dressed. I forced myself to act normal, though the effort made my jaw ache from clenching it so tightly. I needed a plan. Confronting her then and there felt wrong, too rushed. I needed more information, more proof. My thoughts spiraled as I remembered one of the messages I had read. "I'll see you tomorrow at our spot." Their spot? Mia had no plans that day, or at least none she told me about. But now I knew better than to believe everything she said. I decided I would follow her. The thought filled me with equal parts dread and resolve. If there was more to uncover, I needed to see it for myself. The next morning, I pretended to leave for work as usual, kissing Mia on the forehead before walking out the door. I drove down the street, parked, and waited. Sure enough, less than an hour later, Mia left the house, dressed casually but with more care than she usually put into errands. She was meeting Ellie. I knew it in my gut. I tailed her, keeping a safe distance. She drove across town to a park I didn't recognize, its lush greenery and secluded benches perfect for private conversations, or worse. My heart pounded as I watched her get out of the car. She was holding something, a picnic basket. A minute later, another car pulled into the lot. A woman stepped out. She was tall, with short black hair and an effortlessly confident air. She smiled as she approached Mia, and I saw my wife's face light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching a stranger. Ellie. They walked together toward a shaded corner of the park, out of sight from the main paths. I followed on foot, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me. As they sat down on a blanket under a sprawling oak tree, I ducked behind a nearby bush, my heart hammering in my chest. Their laughter carried on the breeze, light and intimate. They leaned into each other as they talked, their bodies close enough to brush against one another. It wasn't long before Ellie reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind Mia's ear. Mia smiled shyly, then leaned in for a kiss. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, proof of the betrayal I dreaded. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, was kissing someone else. Not just anyone, a woman. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a part of Mia I'd never known, a part she'd hidden from me. I couldn't stay there. My hands trembled as I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavy with the weight of what I'd just seen. By the time I got behind the wheel, anger had taken over. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I stared at the dashboard, trying to decide my next move. Confront her now? Wait until she got home? Pretend I didn't know and let it fester? No, I couldn't play dumb. Not after this. I drove home, barely remembering the route. Once there, I sat in the living room, waiting. Hours passed. The longer I waited, the more the anger simmered, building into something dangerous. By the time Mia walked through the door, all I could see was red. "Oh, hey," she said, surprised to find me home. "I thought you had a long day at work." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my silence cutting through the air like a knife. Mia's smile faltered, confusion flashing in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. I stood slowly, my hands trembling. "You tell me, Mia." Her eyes darted away, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "Jake, what? I followed you today," I said, cutting her off. My voice was cold, unfamiliar even to me. "I saw you. At the park. With her." Her face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, she whispered, "I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "What exactly are you going to explain? That you've been sneaking around behind my back? That you're in love with someone else? That you've been lying to me for God knows how long?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "Not this time." "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "Then what is it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Tell me, Mia, what the hell have you been doing with her?" She hesitated, the silence stretching between us until it felt unbearable. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said. "Ellie, she's different. She understands me in a way I didn't even know I needed. I never wanted to hurt you, Jake." I laughed again, the sound hollow. "Hurt me? Mia, you destroyed me." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mia broke down, sobbing into her hands. But I couldn't comfort her, not this time. All I felt was a cold, seething rage and the undeniable truth. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Mia's sobs filled the room, each one like a dagger twisting in my chest. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to hold her like I always had during her weakest moments. But this wasn't weakness, it was betrayal. Her tears felt like salt in a wound she'd inflicted. How long? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. How long have you been seeing her? Mia wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. It's not. I mean, we didn't plan this. It just happened. Answer the question. I snapped, slamming my hand on the coffee table. The sound reverberated through the room, silencing her sobs for a moment. 3 months, she whispered, barely audible. 3 months. 90 days of lies, secrets, and stolen moments. 90 days where I'd been blind, believing we were just going through a rough patch like any other couple. The betrayal felt even deeper now, the knife cutting to the bone. Was it just her? I asked, my voice low and steady, masking the fury bubbling underneath. Or are there more? Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. No, it's only Ellie. I swear. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the woman I thought I knew. But all I saw was guilt. Raw, ugly guilt. She wasn't lying, not about that. Still, the truth didn't feel like much of a consolation. The silence between us grew heavy, oppressive. Finally, Mia broke it. Jake, I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I couldn't ignore how I felt. Ellie, she makes me feel alive. Alive? I repeated, incredulous. And what am I, Mia? Deadweight? Something to cast aside because you got bored? It's not like that, she said quickly. I love you. I do. But with Ellie, it's different. She makes me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Her words hit me like a slap. Different. That was the word she chose. Not better, not more, just different. Like I was a box she checked off and moved past. So what now? I asked, crossing my arms. Do you want to leave? Start a new life with her? What about me? What about the life we've built together? Mia hesitated, her eyes flickering with indecision. I don't know, she admitted. I'm so confused. I love you, Jake, but I love her too. Her confession was both infuriating and heartbreaking. I had always imagined love as something sacred, something that couldn't be shared. But here she was, telling me she divided hers between me and another woman, and it felt like a slap to the face. The days that followed were hell. Mia and I barely spoke, the weight of her confession hanging over us like a storm cloud. She stayed at home, avoiding Ellie, or so she said. I couldn't be sure. My trust in her was shattered, replaced by paranoia and anger. I became obsessed with knowing everything. Where she went, who she talked to, every detail of her day. It wasn't healthy. I knew that, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers, closure, something to make sense of the chaos. One night, after Mia had gone to bed, I went through her phone again. I hated myself for it, but I had to know. The texts between her and Ellie were still there, though far less frequent now. Ellie seemed frustrated, pushing Mia to make a decision. You can't have it both ways, one message read. Either you're with me, or you're not. I felt a bitter satisfaction reading that. At least Ellie was as unhappy with this situation as I was. But the satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by a deeper, darker anger. How had I become this man, the one spying on his wife and grasping at scraps of information like a desperate fool? I put her phone down and went to the living room, pouring myself a drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but the pain was a welcome distraction from the mess my life. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally came to a head a few nights later. Mia and I were sitting in tense silence, the TV playing some mindless sitcom neither of us was watching. Out of nowhere, she turned to me, her eyes filled with resolve. I want to see her, she said. The words hit me like a punch. What? I need to talk to her, Mia continued, her voice trembling. We need to figure out where we stand. I can't keep living like this, Jake. Neither of us can. I laughed bitterly. You mean all three of us, don't you? She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she looked at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Jake. I'm trying to be honest with you. Honest? I spat. Now you want to be honest? After months of lying to my face? I know I've hurt you, she said softly, but I can't undo what's already happened. I need to figure out what I want, and I can't do that without talking to her. Her words stung, but she was right about one thing. We couldn't keep living in this limbo. If she needed closure, I wasn't going to stop her, but I wasn't going to make it easy either. Fine, I said, my voice cold. Go see her. But don't expect me to be here when you get back. Mia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes again. But I was done comforting her. I turned away, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. As she left that night, I watched her car disappear into the darkness, unsure if I'd ever see her the same way again. Mia didn't return that night. I stayed awake, sitting in the darkness of our living room, staring at the empty driveway and wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. My mind was a battlefield, caught between rage and despair. When dawn broke, the driveway was still empty. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. No texts, no calls, nothing. She was with Ellie. Of course she was. By mid-morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called her, each ring shredding my nerves. Finally, the line clicked. Hello? Her voice was hoarse, as though she'd been crying all night. Where are you? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I stayed with Ellie, she admitted, and the words made my stomach churn. We talked. That's all. And what did you decide? I pressed, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. There was a long silence before she spoke. I need time, Jake. I don't know what to do. Time. That's what she needed. More time to string me along while she figured out whether her love for Ellie outweighed the life we'd built together. You've already made your choice, Mia, I said coldly. If you really wanted to be here, you wouldn't have left. It's not that simple, she said, her voice breaking. I love you both. The line went dead before I could respond, and I stared at my phone, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. How dare she claim to love me while running to someone else? How dare she? That night, she came home. I was in the kitchen, nursing my second whiskey of the evening, when I heard her keys jingle at the door. The sound of her footsteps was hesitant, as if she were walking into a stranger's house. Jake, she called softly. I didn't respond. She found me in the kitchen, her face pale and her eyes rimmed red from crying. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had once loved. Can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair, gesturing for her to continue. My silence seemed to unnerve her, and she twisted her hands nervously. I don't want to lose you, she began. But I can't walk away from Ellie either. I don't know what that means, or how to make this work, but I don't want to let go of either of you. I stared at her, incredulous. Make it work? What does that even mean, Mia? You expect me to just sit back and share you? No, She stopped herself, struggling to find the words. I don't know. I just know I love you both. Her words were like gasoline on an open flame. I slammed my glass down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. You don't get to have it both ways. I shouted, my voice reverberating with a fury I could barely control. You've already torn my heart out, Mia. Now you want to grind it into dust? I'm trying to be honest with you, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I'm trying to figure this out, Jake. Please, don't give up on us. Us? I laughed bitterly. There is no us, Mia. Not anymore. The days that followed were a nightmare. Mia stayed in the guest room, and we avoided each other as much as possible. The tension in the house was suffocating, every silence filled with unspoken accusations. I tried to focus on work, on anything that could distract me from the chaos at home, but nothing helped. One evening, as I was scrolling through my emails, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from a mutual friend, someone who didn't know about the storm raging behind closed doors. They'd tagged Mia in a photo on social media. Out of curiosity, I opened it. It was a candid shot from a party the friend had hosted weeks ago. Mia was there, laughing with Ellie. The way they looked at each other was unmistakable, even in a frozen image. It wasn't the look of friends or coworkers. It was the look of two people deeply, painfully in love. Something inside me snapped. The confrontation happened that night. Mia was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, when I walked in. I stood in front of her, the phone clutched tightly in my hand. "Do you love her more than me?" I asked, my voice steady but ice cold. She looked up at me, startled. "Jake, answer the question," I demanded. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "It's not about more or less," she said softly. "It's just different." "Stop saying that," I hissed. "Love isn't supposed to be different. It's supposed to be all or nothing. And right now, it feels like I'm getting nothing." Mia stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Please, Jake," she pleaded. "I don't want to lose you." "You already lost me," I said, my voice cracking. "The moment you chose her, you lost me." Her tears spilled over, and she sank back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her despair. It was too much. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. I didn't know what to do, what decision to make. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to fight for the woman I'd loved for so long. But another part, the darker, angrier part, wanted revenge. And that part was getting harder to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie calm. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made you aware of every sound. Mia's presence still lingered in the air, but it felt different now. Hollow, like a ghost of the woman I once knew. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping coffee and staring out the window. She turned when she heard me, her expression tentative. "Good morning," she said softly, as though afraid her words might shatter the fragile peace. I didn't respond. I grabbed a mug and poured myself coffee, the mundane task grounding me in the chaos of my thoughts. "Jake," she began, her voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about us, about everything." I set the mug down harder than I intended, the sound jolting her. "Have you?" I said, my tone flat. She winced but nodded. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want to fix this. I want us to find a way forward." I turned to her, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Forward?" I repeated. "You think there's a forward from this? After what you've done? You think we can just patch things up like nothing happened?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to try. I don't want to lose you, Jake." The weight of her words pressed down on me, and for a moment, I felt like the ground might give way. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could salvage the wreckage of our marriage. But the image of her with Ellie, her laughter, her kiss, was seared into my mind, a scar that wouldn't fade. I left the house after that, needing to clear my head. I drove aimlessly for hours, winding through back roads and quiet neighborhoods, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. But no matter how far I drove, the anger followed me, coiling tighter and tighter. By the time I got home, the anger had transformed into something darker, something more dangerous. Mia wasn't in the living room when I walked in, and for a moment, I thought she might have left. Relief and disappointment warred within me. But then I heard her voice, soft, muffled, coming from the bedroom. I followed the sound, my footsteps silent against the hardwood floor. The door was ajar, and through the crack, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I'm okay," she was saying, her voice shaky. "No, he doesn't know I'm talking to you. I needed to hear your voice." My chest tightened, the anger flaring white-hot. Ellie, of course. Even now, after everything, she was still talking to her. "I don't know what to do," Mia continued, her voice breaking. "I love him, but I love you too. I'm so confused." I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved the door open, and Mia jumped, her phone slipping from her hand and landing on the floor with a thud. "Jake!" she gasped, scrambling to pick up the phone. "Don't bother," I said coldly. "I've heard enough." The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. Every suppressed emotion, every word left unsaid, came pouring out in a torrent of anger and accusation. Mia tried to explain, to defend herself, but I wasn't listening anymore. My trust in her was gone, replaced by a seething fury that burned away any remnants of the love we once shared. "You're pathetic," I spat, my voice shaking with rage. "You can't even make a decision. You want to keep me here as your backup while you run off to her whenever you feel like it. Well, I'm done. Mia, I'm not going to sit here and let you humiliate me." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "Not this time. Jake, please, save it," I snapped. "Go be with her if she's so important to you. But don't expect me to stick around and play second fiddle." I left the room, slamming the door behind me, and went straight to the garage. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a bottle of whiskey and poured myself a glass, the sharp burn doing little to dull the storm raging inside me. The next day, Mia stayed in the guest room, the tension between us thicker than ever. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped, cold. I didn't know how much longer I could live like this, caught in a limbo of anger and heartbreak. That night, I made a decision. If Mia wasn't going to choose, I would make the choice for her. And it wasn't going to end well. The rage that had been simmering inside me now burned with an intensity one could no longer control. I wasn't thinking clearly. My mind was clouded by betrayal, humiliation, and the endless images of Mia with Ellie. I wanted to hurt them, not just emotionally, but in a way that would leave a scar as deep as the one they'd carved into me. Mia stayed out of my way the following day, sensing that my anger had reached a boiling point. She kept to the guest room, only emerging to grab food or check her phone. I pretended not to notice, but every time I saw her, the memories of her confessions came flooding back, stoking the fire inside me. I needed a plan, something to make her, and Ellie, feel the weight of what they'd done to me. That evening, Mia stepped out of the house, saying she was going for a walk to clear her head. I didn't ask where she was going or who she might meet. I didn't need to. I had already guessed she was heading to Ellie's. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. She led me across town to a small, upscale apartment complex. I parked a block away and watched as she went inside. I waited, my heart pounding, the anger building with every passing second. About 20 minutes later, I saw her through the window of a first-floor unit. She was sitting on a couch next to Ellie, their heads close together, talking quietly. For a moment, I considered storming in, confronting them right there. But that wasn't enough. I wanted something more. I wanted them to feel the same pain, the same helplessness that I'd been drowning in for weeks. I returned home, my mind spinning with dark thoughts. I poured myself another drink, the alcohol doing little to numb the storm inside me. I started pacing the living room, my anger fueling every step. It wasn't just about Mia anymore. It was about the humiliation, the betrayal, the complete disregard for the life we had built together. Hours passed, and Mia still hadn't returned. I checked her location on the phone tracker we'd set up years ago for emergencies. She was still at Ellie's. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, the little dot mocking me with its stillness. I downed another drink, my resolve hardening with every sip. If Mia thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. When she finally came home, it was past midnight. I was sitting in the living room, waiting. She walked in quietly, clearly trying not to wake me, but froze when she saw me sitting there in the dim light. "Jake," she said softly, "you're still up? Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with venom. She hesitated. "I went to see Ellie." "And?" I pressed, leaning forward. "Did you figure it out? Did you finally decide who you want?" Mia's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't make that choice, Jake. I can't just stop loving her." Her words were like a slap to the face. I stood, towering over her, my anger boiling over. "Then why the hell are you here, Mia? If you love her so much, why don't you just stay there? Or is it because you want to keep playing both sides, keeping me on the hook while you run to her whenever you feel like it?" "It's not like that," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm trying, Jake. I'm trying to figure this out. Figure it out somewhere else," I snapped. "I'm done being your safety net." Her tears spilled over, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing. but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. The love I once felt for her was buried beneath layers of anger and betrayal. I turned and left the room, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, I woke with a plan. It was dark, twisted, and born out of a pain so deep that it felt like a part of me had already died. I didn't care about consequences anymore. I wanted revenge, raw, unfiltered, and brutal. Mia would regret what she had done. Ellie would, too. And when it was over, they'd both know what it felt like to be destroyed. The days that followed felt like a fever dream. Every interaction with Mia became a chess match, each move calculated to keep her off balance. I wasn't sure if she noticed the change in me, the way my words cut deeper, the way I lingered a little too long in silence, watching her squirm under the weight of my gaze. I wanted her to feel the tension, the fear of not knowing what would come next. Mia stayed out of my way for the most part, keeping to herself in the guest room. She barely spoke, barely ate, and the shadows under her eyes grew darker with each passing day. Good. Let her feel the weight of what she'd done. Let her drown in it. One night, after I was sure she'd fallen asleep, I took her phone from the kitchen counter and scrolled through her messages with Ellie. They were still talking. Of course they were. The texts were full of longing and regret, each one a knife to my chest. I miss you. I hate that we're apart. I wish we could just run away and leave everything behind. I clenched my fists, the anger surging through me like a wildfire. Run away? Leave everything behind? Was that her plan? To throw away our life together for this woman she barely knew? I sent Ellie a message from Mia's phone. Let's meet tomorrow. Same place. I need to see you. Then I deleted the message from Mia's thread so she wouldn't notice. If she wanted to keep secrets, I could play that game too. The next day, I left work early and drove to the park where they always met. I parked a short distance away, hidden among the trees, and waited. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched Ellie arrive first, stepping out of her car and glancing around nervously. She was dressed casually, but there was an air of anticipation about her, like she was about to see someone she couldn't wait to embrace. I stepped out of my car, the cool metal of the tire iron I'd brought weighing heavy in my hand. My breaths were shallow, my mind racing with 100 conflicting thoughts. A part of me screamed to turn back, to stop before it went too far. But the anger drowned it out, pushing me forward. Ellie didn't see me until I was just a few feet away. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jake," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. "What are you?" Before she could finish, I swung. The tire iron connected with the side of her car, the metal shrieking as it left a deep gash in the door. Ellie jumped back, her hands raised defensively. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "What's wrong with me?" I hissed, advancing on her. "What's wrong with you? You destroyed my marriage. You took everything from me." "I didn't take anything," she shot back, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Mia came to me. She loves me, Jake. You can't change that." Her words were like gasoline on the fire. I lunged, grabbing her by the collar and slamming her against the car. She struggled, but I held her firm, my face inches from hers. "You think this is love?" I growled. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" "Let her go," came a voice behind me. I turned, my grip loosening as I saw Mia standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with horror. She must have followed me, probably after seeing the fake message I'd sent. "Jake, stop," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This isn't you. You don't know who I am anymore," I said coldly. "You made sure of that." Mia stepped closer, her hands outstretched like she was approaching a wild animal. "Please," she said softly, "this has to stop. You're going to ruin everything." "Everything's already ruined," I spat. "Thanks to you." Ellie managed to break free from my grasp, stumbling back and putting herself between me and Mia. "You need help, Jake," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "This isn't normal." "Don't talk to me about normal," I snapped. "You're the one who turned my life upside down." Mia placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder, trying to steady her. "Go," she said quietly. "I'll handle this." Ellie hesitated, her eyes darting between us. Are you sure? Yes, Mia said firmly. Just go. Ellie nodded reluctantly and climbed into her car, the engine roaring to life as she sped away. I stood there, watching her disappear down the road, my chest heaving with rage and frustration. When I turned back to Mia, her face was streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted it to come to this. Neither did I said, my voice breaking. But you gave me no choice. She stepped closer, reaching for me, but I pulled away. Don't, I said sharply. Don't touch me. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for me. Jake, she said softly, please, we can still fix this. I shook my head, the weight of everything crashing down on me. There's nothing left to fix. That night, the house was silent, the kind of silence that suffocates and presses against your chest. Mia stayed in the guest room again, the door locked. I sat in the living room, staring at the empty whiskey glass on the coffee table, the weight of what I'd done crashing down on me. Ellie had called the police after she left. 2 officers came to the house that night, knocking sharply on the door. Mia answered, her voice shaking as she spoke to them. She denied everything, said it was just an argument that got out of hand, that nothing had happened. They left reluctantly, warning us both to keep it civil. But I knew the damage was done. Ellie wasn't going to let this go. The next morning, Mia and I sat across from each other at the dining table. She looked exhausted, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from crying all night. I didn't feel much better. The anger that had fueled me for so long was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. We can't go on like this, she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper, each word weighed down with sorrow. This, whatever we're doing to each other, it's destroying us. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. I've made my decision, she continued, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm leaving. The words should have felt like a knife to the chest, but instead, they brought an odd sense of relief. The fight was over. The war between us had reached its inevitable conclusion. When? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Today, she said, her voice breaking. I already packed my things. Ellie's coming to get me. Her name made my stomach turn, but I didn't argue. What was there to say? The woman I loved was leaving, not for another man, but for a life I couldn't be part of, a life I didn't even understand. When Ellie's car pulled into the driveway, I watched from the window. Mia grabbed her bags, pausing in the doorway to look back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered. Me too, I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. She hesitated for a moment, as if waiting for me to stop her, to fight for her. But I couldn't. I didn't have anything left to give. With a shaky breath, she turned and walked out the door. I watched as Ellie got out of the car and helped her with the bags. They exchanged a few words, their body language tense, before Mia climbed into the passenger seat. Ellie glanced toward the house, her expression hard and unreadable, then got back into the car. A moment later, they were gone. The silence in the house was unbearable after that. Every room felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. The memories of our life together played on a loop in my mind, taunting me with their simplicity. The little things, the way Mia used to laugh at my dumb jokes, the way she'd sing off-key in the shower, were now unbearable echoes in an empty home. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on. But the anger never fully left. It lingered in the corners of my mind, whispering dark thoughts and reminding me of every betrayal. I started drinking more, my days blurring together in a haze of bitterness and regret. One night, weeks after Mia had left, I got a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it hit me like a freight train. I hope you find peace someday. Ellie. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Peace? The word felt like a cruel joke. Peace was a distant memory, a fantasy I could no longer imagine. The anger flared again, hot and consuming. But this time it wasn't directed at Ellie or Mia. It was directed inward, at myself, for letting it get this far, for losing control, for becoming someone I no longer recognized. I deleted the message and threw my phone across the room. The sound of it shattering against the wall was strangely satisfying, a brief release in the midst of my torment. Months passed, and life went on. Mia and Ellie moved in together, or so I heard through mutual friends. I stayed in the house, drowning in my own bitterness. I tried therapy, but the sessions always ended the same, with me walking out, unwilling to confront the depths of my pain. One day, I came across a box in the attic, filled with old photos and keepsakes from our marriage. I found a picture of us from our honeymoon, Mia laughing, her eyes bright with joy, her arms wrapped around me. I stared at it for a long time, the image blurring through my tears. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something other than anger. The sadness hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under and leaving me gasping for air. But beneath the sadness was something else, acceptance. She was gone, and no amount of rage or regret would bring her back. In the end, I wasn't the man she needed, and she wasn't the woman I thought she was. We were two people who had loved deeply but lost our way. And while I couldn't forgive her, or Ellie, I knew I had to let go, for my own sake. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was a start. The end. Oh my God. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.